Welcome to the deep dive. We're taking the source, you send us an article, and really digging into it.
That's the plan.
Today, it's all about the history of the Kurdish press.
A fascinating topic, really.
Our mission, essentially, is to see how these newspapers and journals became, well, more than just news, how they helped preserve Kurdish identity, culture, political hopes, often against pretty incredible odds.
Absolutely. It's a story of resilience.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? How powerful can the written word actually be when a culture is under pressure?
Yeah.
How vital is just writing things down?
Oh, incredibly vital. I mean, think about it. Writing creates a record, right? It builds that shared sense of history, of community,
Mm-hmm.
and it lets ideas spread, especially when, other ways of expressing yourself are shut down. For people facing those kinds of challenges, it's basically a lifeline.
Okay, so let's start where the article starts. Kurdistan, the first Kurdish newspaper. But interestingly, not published where you might expect.
No, exactly. It first appeared in exile,
Hmm.
specifically Cairo, Egypt, April 22nd, 1898.
Cairo.
Wow. Yeah. And the founder, Midhed Bedirsson, he was from the Bedirsson family, a really prominent name, that gave the paper, well, a certain weight from the start,
That name recognition must have helped.
definitely. And just the act of starting it outside the Ottoman Empire's direct grip,
Mm-hmm.
that was a statement in itself.
Huh. Born in exile. That says a lot about the situation right there. And Cairo wasn't its only stop, right? The article mentions it moved around.
It did, yeah. It had quite a journey. Over its 31 issues, it was published in Geneva, London, even Folkestone down in the UK.
Folkestone, really
Yeah.
is
This sort of nomadic life really highlights the huge difficulties, the political hurdles they faced, just keeping it going.
incredible. And the language, it wasn't purely Kurdish. What does that tell us?
Right. Initially, it was mostly Ottoman Turkish with Kurdish popping up sometimes,
Uh-huh.
which likely reflects, who they were trying to reach, not just Kurds, but maybe Ottoman intellectuals, possibly even a European audience, trying to get the word out more broadly.
Makes sense. So what were they actually writing about? What were the big themes in Kurdistan back then?
Well, given it was published in exile, criticizing Ottoman policies was a big part of it. No surprise there.
Right.
But also documenting Kurdish history, pushing for Kurdish rights stuff, often ignored or suppressed by the Ottomans, and crucially trying to preserve the Kurdish language and culture, calling for unity among Kurds.
Unity.
Yeah, and it also introduced readers to, like, European liberal ideas about government and rights, new perspectives.
That call for unity, the article quotes the second issue saying, "Oh, Kurds, if you do not unite, your extinction is inevitable."
That's pretty strong language.
Yeah.
What was driving that urgency?
It wasn't just talk. Kurds were fragmented, scattered across different parts of the Ottoman and Persian empires, facing real pressures, assimilation, political sidelining, even physical threats.
Hmm.
So the press, right from the start, was trying to build that sense of common identity, a shared future, against those forces pulling them apart. Okay, so Kurdistan sets this precedent in exile, but then things shift a bit briefly inside the Ottoman Empire itself, the second constitutional era.
Exactly. After the Young Turk Revolution in 1908, there was this temporary easing of censorship. A window opened up, and that allowed Kurdish intellectuals to actually start publishing within Istanbul,
Mm-hmm.
the heart of the empire. A big change from exile.
A chance to engage directly.
Yeah.
So what kind of journals came out of that period? The article mentions Roji Kurd and Hedoui Kurd.
Yeah, those two. Their focus really shifted more towards, let's say, cultural grounding and intellectual discussion.
Okay.
Roji Kurd, that means Kurdish Day, it became a space for talking about Kurdish history, literature, folklore, linguistics, really digging into the culture.
Right.
And Hedoui Kurd, Kurdish Sun, which had ties back to that Bedirsson family again, it really zeroed in on education, promoting the Kurdish language, and just, general cultural preservation.
So building that cultural foundation. Then, of course, World War I changes everything. The Ottoman Empire collapses, and suddenly there's hope for Kurdish autonomy.
A glimmer of hope, yes. And that's when Jin appears.
Jin, meaning life.
Exactly. Published in Istanbul, 1918-1919. It was the voice of the Kurd Tiyali Simiyeti, the Society for the Advancement of the Kurds. So its timing and backing clearly showed those rising political hopes, that growing sense of national identity after the war.
And Jin seems like it cast an even wider net, language-wise, topic-wise.
It did. It used both Ottoman Turkish and Kurdish, so still reaching out, but also actively strengthening Kurdish itself. Themes included, Kurdish identity, national history, but also, importantly, women's education and pushing for language reform. It attracted some key figures like Saladin Bedirsson, remember that name, he comes up again later, and Dr. Nurettin Zaza.
Seladet Bedirksen, got it. The article mentions Jin's vision was about cultural autonomy, peaceful coexistence, built on that strong identity. That feels ambitious for such a turbulent time.
It really was.
And there's that other quote from Jin, issue 4, "A nation's language is its mirror. A people who lose their language will lose their future."
Wow. What's that tell us?
It shows just how deeply they understood the link between language and, well, survival.
Yeah.
Language isn't just talking. It holds your history, your values, who you are as a people. Lose the language, and you risk losing everything. That connection to your past, your future. It's a constant theme, that one.
But that period of openness in Istanbul, it didn't last long, did it?
Yeah.
The article says by the 1920s, many intellectuals were heading into exile again. Why?
Sadly, no, it didn't last. Those hopes for Kurdish autonomy, they were pretty much crushed with the rise of the new Turkish Republic.
Okay.
Repression ramped up after the Turkish War of Independence, targeting Kurdish political and cultural life. So many of those same intellectuals who'd been active in Istanbul had to flee again to Syria, Iraq, Lebanon this time.
Another wave of exile, and that must have shifted the focus again. Absolutely. This new exile period really sharpened the focus onto literacy and, yes, that critical job of language preservation. Which brings us to Hawar.
Hawar. Okay, why was this one so important?
Hawar, meaning the call or the cry, published in Damascus from 32 to 43, founded by Seladet Ali Bedirksen again.
Ah, there he is.
Yep, his biggest legacy. Introducing and really pushing the Latin-based Kurdish alphabet. It was massive.
Changing the whole script?
Yeah. A huge effort to standardize the written language, make it easier to learn, boost literacy across Kurdish communities.
That's a monumental task. So what did Hawar actually publish, besides, explaining the new alphabet?
The content was all geared towards that goal. Grammar lessons for the new script, lots of Kurdish poems and stories to show off the language, children's literature to get kids reading early educational essays,
Yeah.
mostly in the Kurmanji dialect, trying to cement that standard.
And that quote from Hawar, "We write so our language does not die, for if the language dies, the people will too." Just incredibly direct. The stakes felt that high.
It perfectly captures the mission, doesn't it? That deep belief. Language preservation equals cultural survival, equals the survival of the people. It was existential.
And the article also mentions Ranahi and Rojanu in Syria around the 1940s. Were they similar?
Yeah, they followed in that vein, also focused on public education, preserving folklore.
Okay.
Things like children's stories, simplified history, articles on women's education, traditional tales, all about reinforcing that cultural identity from the ground up.
So the focus really stays tight on language and culture during that exile period. Then the article shifts focus a bit to Iraq and Iran. What was happening there?
Right, the press developed in parallel, but with its own regional flavors. In Iraq, you had Kurdistan, again, different publication, same name in Suleimania in the 1920s.
Linked to Sheikh Mahmoud Barzanji.
Exactly, linked to his movement for autonomy. So its focus was very much on nationalism, self-determination, political commentary tied to the struggles right there in Iraq.
Makes sense. And Iran.
In Iran, during the very brief Mahabad Republic in the 1940s, you had Bangi Kurdistan, the Call of Kurdistan. Its goal was pretty clear. Promote Kurdish national unity and political awareness during that short period of self-rule.
So same core ideas of identity, but the political messaging really reflects the local context. Now, fast forward. Turkey after the 1980 military coup. Sounds like a really tough time for the Kurdish press.
Oh, incredibly tough.
Yeah.
Severe systematic repression, heavy censorship, outright bans, journalists facing serious risks, imprisonment, worse.
Just for publishing.
Yes. But remarkably, despite all that, the 1990s saw this resurgence, a real comeback for Kurdish media inside Turkey.
Even with the ongoing danger. The article uses Özgür Gündem as an example of that bravery and the price paid.
Precisely. Özgür Gündem, starting in 92, published in Turkish and Kurdish. It tackled really sensitive stuff, human rights abuses, news from Kurdish areas the mainstream ignored, political analysis, interviews.
Dangerous territory.
Absolutely, and they paid for it. The article mentions the constant pressure, journalists arrested, offices raided, banned multiple times. It just shows the extreme risks they took. It's sobering, really.
Just trying to report the news. And then Azadi Awelet, a big milestone. First daily Kurdish newspaper in Turkey.
Huge milestone. It symbolized this incredible persistence, establishing a regular daily voice in Kurdish within Turkey. News, poetry, cultural pieces, all in Kurdish. A massive step for normalizing the language in public life there.
So that brings us more or less up to date. The article suggests Kurdish media is now, well, it's diverse, print, digital. but still facing challenges.
Yeah, the landscape's definitely broader now with online stuff, social media,
Mm.
but the legal pressures, the economic constraints, they haven't gone away in many places.
Still difficult.
Still difficult.
Yeah.
But you see the vital role played by, local papers, websites, literary magazines, even podcasts now,
Yeah.
all keeping the language and culture alive. And we shouldn't forget the diaspora, especially in Europe.
Right. They're still publishing journals, academic work.
Exactly. Continuing that legacy, keeping the conversation going globally, it's quite something.
Looking back at this whole history, from Kurdistan and Cairo to today's digital world, what's the big takeaway? What's the enduring role of the Kurdish press?
I think the main thing is it's always been more than just news. It's been this fundamental tool for, well, cultural resistance, for keeping history alive, for asserting identity against all odds.
Resistance, memory, identity.
Yeah. When you consider the censorship, the exile, the violence, the fact that these publications kept going and new ones kept emerging, it's truly remarkable.
Yeah, it really is. That resilience.
It just underlines that basic human need, doesn't it? To tell your own story, preserve your heritage, fight for your rights. And the work started by Bediüzzaman and those early pioneers, it clearly continues to inspire people today, finding new ways, new platforms.
It definitely leaves you thinking that, looking at this history, this struggle just to publish, what other kinds of media today, things that maybe seem fleeting or less permanent, might actually be playing that same crucial role, shaping and protecting identities, especially for groups on the margins. Yeah, something to chew on. Thanks for walking us through all that.
My pleasure. It's an important story to tell.